Okay, friends. Last couple of days we've been talking a lot about the mind and meditation and how to cultivate mindfulness, concentration, and the development of wisdom, 3 levels of wisdom. And basically, focusing on the meditation practice. But in a couple of days, you'll be going back home, and the biggest question people have is, how can they integrate the practice of the Dhamma and meditation into their daily life. And they're wondering how are they going to, continue their practice, amidst, balancing, work and family and social obligations and other pressures, and the fast-paced busyness of, most people's daily life. And so today I want to begin talking about, how to gradually incorporate our meditation practice into the daily life or into the Dhamma. But meditation is only a part of the practice of Dhamma. Now, normally when people say they're practicing Dhamma, of course they might mean different things depending on what it means for them. But the traditional practice of Dhamma, according to the Theravada, teaching, is the Eightfold Path. As the teachings of the Buddha, the Dhamma, are outlined in the 4 Noble Truths: the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. And that path is called the Noble Eightfold Path, or Arya Astanga Magga. And basically that incorporates how we live our life. And meditation is only 2 of those steps, really, out of 8. Is the meditation practice. The rest of it is, many of the other ones are about actually how to guidelines of how to live our life in our interactions with society, other people. Because that's where, most of you will live your life. And so it governs all aspects of our body, speech, and mind. So I wanted to begin talking about that. Of course, the Noble Eightfold Path, as most of you probably know or have read about anyway, it has 8 steps called the path leading to the end of suffering. And it begins with right understanding, called Sammaditthi, or right view. Sometimes it's called right view, other times other people translate it as right understanding. But basically it means understanding what you're about to do. Now if you're going to spend, many years, or let's say your whole life, practicing the Dhamma, or at least a long time, let's say, and a lot of effort, even a lot of money, a lot of your time in practicing, you should understand what it is. You should understand why you're doing it. So right understanding is that that basic understanding of what the life is and how to live a skillful life. It minimizes the accumulation of problems, of suffering, and to make life flow more mellowly and flow on toward the goal of liberation, or the end of suffering. And of course, suffering has 3 levels. The Buddha defines suffering as 3 levels. I think I've already mentioned those, but just briefly, the first level is the suffering connected with this body of getting sick, diseases, old age, death, and all the other types of problems and pain connected with your own body or the bodies of your loved one, and then the mental grief, sorrow, lamentation, weeping and wailing that go when your loved ones get sick or killed in accidents, and so on. So that's called, let's say, ordinary suffering. And then there's the suffering of not getting what you want and getting what you don't want. So this is more subtle, it's more mental, where the other one involves a lot of physical suffering. Of course, the second level also involves that too. If you get sick, it's something you don't want, and so you suffer because of that. And then the last level of suffering, as I mentioned, in short, the 5 aggregates of clinging. So I like to call that, or relate to that, as the suffering of ignorance, the suffering of not knowing the truth. Because it's not knowing the truth of the 5 aggregates that we cling to them and identify them as I, me, and mine. And all of our karma is revolving around those 5 aggregates. So it's the suffering of ignorance, not knowing the truth, or the spiritual suffering. So you could say there's physical suffering, mental suffering, spiritual suffering. And the practice of Dhamma helps to address all those 3 levels. Anyway, so the right understanding, as we've already mentioned, is understanding the law of karma. It's probably the most important one, because that's what we're involved with on a daily basis. Our actions of body, speech, and mind. And what are called the 3 doorways of creating karma are through the body, speech, and mind. And all of the steps of the Eightfold Path are basically designed for helping to purify those levels of mind or thought, and through the practice of sila, controlling and eventually purifying our actions of body and speech, which contribute or cause the greatest types of direct suffering, as feedback or consequences of our speech and actions. So the law of karma is probably the most important one to understand. And we've already mentioned a few of those things. And then impermanence, the 3 characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, or impermanence, and then the suffering that comes from impermanence, and no self. And of course many other related issues. But basically it means, it's a kind of a, right understanding as kind of a world view. It's our view of, or understanding of what sort of life is and the purpose of life. And the end of suffering is also one of the purposes of life, within that Dharma viewpoint. And of course, the suffering is in the Dhamma also includes the idea about the immensity of samsara. That not only in this life itself, but this mind has been moving through the realms of samsara since basically beginningless time. That this life itself that we may be suffering in isn't sort of the only one. This mind is an ancient mind that's been being recycled over and over and over again through various types of experiences. Now, of course, some people may not believe in that, but that's part of the traditional Dhamma understanding about the suffering. That it's not just the suffering we're having in this life, but if you don't take care of this life, and in suffering in this life, then there's bound to be other existences where you're going to continue to suffer. Because whatever you die with in your mind is carried over into another existence where you have to take care of your unfinished business. And basically that means whatever habits and other delusions and so on that if you still die with, those are going to be the basis of having to come back and deal with another time, or many other times. Anyway, so that's part of the understanding about the dukkha and suffering. But anyway, so this the world view is important. So, because the way you believe or the way you think about life, or how life started, or what is the purpose of life, that's the way you're going to think. So the way you believe is the way you're going to think. And as I mentioned yesterday, the way you think is the way you're going to speak. And the way you speak is the way you're going to use the body in actions. And the way that you're going to probably earn your livelihood. So, and the right view is very important. Because we can see that there's lots of world views in the world, whether they're religious views about what life is, or what happens after life, or the purpose of life, or how you reach salvation or whatever, or even philosophical views like the capitalist view or the Marxist view or whatever. And that people live their life according to these belief systems. And we can see that due to some of those views, the world has gotten to the point where it is now. If you have a world view that says the earth was made by somebody for you to enjoy and go there and multiply and use it the way you want and so on, well, unfortunately, that's what happened to a certain extent. So, so that's why cultivating the right view is very important. But the right view is also about the mind, and what is the mind, in the nature of consciousness, even, which is even more important in the Dhamma point of view. So, that right view again, it refers to those three levels of wisdom. So you get an intellectual right view by reading the texts, hearing talks. You get interested in, let's say, the Dhamma, something new. Oh, I haven't heard that before. Four Noble Truths, the end of suffering, nirvana, karma. You read these things, kind of, pricks your interest. Yeah, it's pretty cool. But then you have to go on thinking about it. And this is an experience that I had. When I first heard about Buddhism, it was because I took a course in world religions in junior college. Because I was planning a trip around the world, by land back following the hippie trail, in the early 70s. And I wanted to learn something about the religions that I was the countries I was going to be going through, so on. So I took a course in world religions, and I chose Buddhism to write my term paper on. In those days, there weren't many books on Buddhism. In the public library in a big city in California, there was 4 books. Can you believe it? Only 4 books on Buddhism in the whole library. But anyway, I had to do some research, and I wrote this paper and got an A+ on it. It was the first one and the last one I ever got. And I'd never been one to, go to the library, too much like that. And my mother was a school teacher, and she saw me going to the library a few times, and go, "What's got into that boy?" Of course, she was happy about that. But anyway, so after the course was finished, of course, in those days there weren't any Buddhist centers really, except maybe in New York, maybe in Los Angeles. There was an odd Chinese temple or something, but back in the really late 60s, there was hardly any centers. Or hardly any books, meditation, except transcendental meditation. That was the only type of meditation that was known about. Anyway, so having got kind of turned on by this intellectual understanding of the Dhamma, I basically just forgot about it because I was busy making up for lost time. I'd been in the army for 3 years in the height of the hippie era and all that, so I wanted to make up for lost time, right? Partying, taking drugs, and all that. So, basically that understanding of Dhamma went in one ear and out the other because I didn't go on thinking about it. And I wound up doing a lot of things that, I suffered from because I hadn't thought about it. Now I'm just saying this to show the connection between right understanding and right thought. That you have to go on thinking about what you believe or what you have read. Otherwise, it's not going to do you a lot of good. So, right thought is the second step of the Eightfold Path. That means basically thinking about the Dhamma. Although specifically it refers to 3 types of right thought. It's called the thought of renunciation, or nekkhamma sankappa. Sometimes it's also translated as right resolve, but right thought is good enough. Anyway, now this is all based on the Dhamma. So what is the second noble truth? Right? Craving or greed and attachment is one of the causes of suffering. And hoarding things and being addicted to so many material objects and comfort and all this kind of thing, amassing things. So, because we cling to those things, and then also we might do, and if we don't have enough money to get those things we crave, we might go out and steal and kill even, because these things happen for the way people, get stuff. So the thought of renunciation is, about not, thinking what a burden to have so many possessions. Because when you have a lot of possessions and you have to worry about them, getting stolen or getting, decayed or broken, or you have to protect them and clean them, and you wind up spending all your time just fiddling around and protecting about the stuff, and a lot of it that you don't even probably use much. That people amass so much stuff. So the thought of renunciation means kind of lightening. I like to use the modern term downsizing, right? Or simplifying one's life, rather than getting burdened with so many unnecessary possessions. That to simplify the life. Now, some people read renunciation and think, oh my gosh, I have to become a monk or a nun. I have to give up the world and become a monk or a nun. How can I do that? But for lay people, okay, that avenue may be, there for certain, some strange people like me, I suppose. But, but for lay people, you can see it as basically just simplifying one's life or downsizing. So, especially like with adults, maybe they had a big house because they had 3 or 4 kids back in the day, and then all of them have left the nest, and the wife and the husband, or maybe it's mostly the wife, has to clean the whole house and, worry about all these things. And so, downsize. So take stock of what you have. It's a good habit, like every year. Kind of take stock of the things that you have in your possessions in your house. It just take a lot of your time, but don't really give you much actual benefit. And it becomes the reason why you can't go on retreats, or can't go to the Thursday night meditation class or something, because not only material possessions, but maybe you have all these different hobbies, and basket weaving on Tuesday nights, and bridge club on Monday nights, and bowling on Thursday nights, and people pack every day of the week with things to do because they don't like to sit around and be lonely, because then the ego thinks it's, nobody likes me. So, it likes to join clubs and do lots of things because then, meets people and exciting. So that's one thing that's going on there. So anyway, because I've heard, I lived here for 23 years, and when we were having these retreats all the time, and usually 50 people will sign up for the retreat, and then we have a limit of, let's say 35 or 40, and then the last couple of days of the retreat, we get all kind of phone calls. People have to cancel. Well, one of my 7 cats got sick, and I have to give it diabetes injections or antibiotic injections every day, and I can't find anybody to cat sit. Well, who's going to water my 50 house plants? Well, the excuses are endless. We've heard every single one. And don't get me wrong. I mean, some of those things are maybe valid, but I'm just trying to, stress a point that people, can't find time to come to the retreats because of, they've have all these burdens and other chores that they've accumulated to take care of. Can I wait till later? Write it down for tonight, maybe at the end. So, renunciation. And not only material possessions, well, in that sense. So when the kids go out of the house, the parents might sell the house, get a smaller one, get a motor home, We don't have a big yard to take care of. Simplify the life. There's ways of doing that. But not only the material possessions, the mental baggage too. How much mental baggage do we carry around with us that most of it is, or at least a lot of it, is of not much use or an actual burden? Carrying around your grudges against somebody, not having forgiven somebody for something, or just reliving all your memories and so on, the past and so on. But anyway, just a lot of worries and fears that just drain our energy. So to renounce those, or to at least try to let go of those, make them do the necessary steps. It helps to minimize those things. So you have more time to really do what you like to do. In terms of the Dhamma, that means more time for, I suppose, going on retreats, practicing your daily meditations longer, and so on. So that helps to, again, for the mind to appreciate the non-greed, or to appreciate the benefits of having a more simplified mind that's not always having to worry about so many things. And then there's the right speech. Or excuse me, I forgot to. That was only the first part of right thought. Okay? So, the second of the right thoughts is the thought of non-ill will. Because so many people carry ill will with them. About groups of people, or about institutions, or about individuals, or so many things. That means, anger, ill will, resentment, animosity, especially to people from your present or your past, and so on, and thinking about it. And it's a burden on the mind. So the antidote for the renunciation, or the antidote for greed, of course, is the practice of giving. So as part of that renunciation, you have a yard sale and get rid of a lot of the stuff that's cluttering up your house. Another aspect of that is, it wastes your time. Like, your 50 pair of shoes right in the closet. You're trying to find one shoe and the other one's missing. You have to dive through so many things and spend a half an hour trying to find the other shoe, because you have so many, whatever it is, shoes or clothes or other objects in your garage. And you spend so much time looking for, because it's all buried underneath other stuff. So that's another aspect of that. So the antidote for ill will is practicing metta. And metta is based on the idea that all beings are in the same karmic soup, so to speak, and that everybody affects everybody else. And even to take that a little deeper from the Dhamma point of view, when you bring in the idea about the many lifetimes our mind has been going through, that we've all been each other's mother, father, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, friend, enemy, and stranger, many times over in all those infinite lives. The Buddha has even mentioned that in the suttas. So that if you have some unfriendly person in this life, or a so-called enemy, they might have been your mother in a past life. Anyway, that's the attitude that we try to cultivate. Whether it's true or not, it's the attitude. And having the attitude help you to then perhaps have a softer tone toward other people. So the cultivating metta and seeing all beings in the world. Again, as I mentioned yesterday, they're patients in the hospital. They're all sick. So we're all sick. Till we attain enlightenment, we're all still sick with ignorance. Because ignorance is the disease, actually. And what is disease? The word disease, right? Dis-ease. It's very interesting. Right? We think disease is a virus or this, but dis-ease. Most people are not at ease because they're full of tension, stress. Always. So most people are not at ease. So that's the biggest disease. Not because people are in the past and future. Their mind's spinning around between past and future. They're not at ease. Because when there's past and future, there'll be worry, fear, anxiety about what's going to happen and so on. So the practice of metta is, helps to minimize that. When you see that anger coming up, to instead reflect, why am I angry at this person? And bring all your Dhamma knowledge on that. And then the third type of right thought is the thought of compassion, or called karuna. Now these two are a little bit related, the metta and karuna. But compassion is not wanting to cause suffering to others, wanting to relieve the suffering of others. And compassion is kind of more active. So you actively do something to relieve the pain of others, like console them, or, for example, or help an old lady across the street that's struggling, or go visit the sick person, or in some way it's more kind of active. Or go work in a soup kitchen to feed the homeless or something. There's so many aspects of that. Whereas metta is more of a thought, cultivating a thought of friendliness. But of course it also should manifest in your actions of body too, friendly actions and so on with others, but still the metta is, is an actual meditation. It is more of a mental, whereas the compassion is more physical. When you see somebody suffering, then you try to help them. But it doesn't mean you have to help everybody, but within our limits. You have to understand one's limits. And there's kind of, imbalanced compassion. Or, excuse me if I use the term, sometimes it's been called idiot compassion. For example, some lady who wants to save all the cats, in the neighborhood, every stray cat that she comes across, she brings it into the house, or she, politically correct, okay? So, there's one lady, because you hear these stories sometimes, one lady had more than 50 or 60 cats in her house, and she couldn't take care of them properly. And they were just, dirtying up the whole house, and it stunk. And the cats were sick because they were laying in their own mess and not getting enough food. And the animal police had to come and arrest the lady. But she thought she was doing it out of compassion, but yet she was actually causing a lot of suffering to the animals, and then eventually caused lots of problems. I just mentioned that just as a very gross type of example of, that all these different types of things like renunciation, even and everything else that you hear about, always has to be middle pot. And it has to be based on wisdom, not ignorance. It has to be based on it. That's why wisdom, right understanding comes first. Before you start to practice other things, you have to understand the meaning and the ultimate purpose of why we are practicing these things. So so apart from the thought of renunciation, the thought of metta, the thought of non-cruelty or compassion, but it means, thinking about the Dhamma. The more you think about it, the more it's going to stick in your mind. Actually memorize it. And so, reading sutras is a very good way, especially Dhammapada verses, very short little, 4-line little stanzas that have a lot of deep meaning in them, or just reading the text to reinforce in your mind over and over. So it becomes like an instant repertoire. When you've studied enough and then memorized some stuff, it's like when something happens, oh yeah, I know that. Not that you have to quote scripture, but it's sort of like having it in Google in the back of your mind, right? Something happens and Google it. How do I deal with fear? Google it. What the Buddha say? Okay, yes. How do I deal with this, with that? How do I practice mindfulness? So, like that, having that, that intellectual understanding and thinking about it. So that any time during the day, there's any incident that happens during the day, instead of like blaming others or taking sides and getting into arguments, you can, there's a little bit of Dhamma, you can reflect on that. Like you see two people quarreling over some maybe minor matter. And then you could say, that's greed. Look, greed is causing suffering. And then ask yourself, do I still have greed in myself? Do I act like that? Whether it's people quarreling or, what so many, you see these things all the time. You hear it on the TV, politicians telling lies and then suffering on it, getting caught for their actions. Everybody eventually gets caught for their actions, 99% of them. And then they suffer big time, right? Because even something you might have done 20 years ago, it can come out of the closet and catch you. And we see that all the time, especially with famous people, politicians, and so on. If not even ourselves. So when these things happen, that's the time, yes, to bring the Dhamma back and reflect on that. For the purpose of reinforcing in yourself, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to go through that again. And so on. So that's why, but if you don't have any Dhamma in your mind to think about, then you're not going to be able to call on it at some important time. Because the more we think about Dhamma, then the less time we have to think about adhamma. Adhamma means things that are contrary to the practice of Dhamma. So following the right thought, so based on the way you think is the way you're going to speak. That's why right speech is the third step of the Eightfold Path. And right speech has 4 kinds. The popular one most people know about is about telling lies, to refrain from telling lies. Because people usually wind up getting caught for telling lies, or they lose sleep and they worry about getting caught. It causes them a lot of torment in their mind. And so to tell the truth, the antidote for telling lies is to tell, the truth, or at least don't tell a lie. And we all know the problems that come with doing that. And that's one of the 5 precepts, of course, refrain from telling lies. The second of the right speech is to refrain from malicious speech. And this is basically like gossip mongering, backbiting, talking about people behind their back, spreading rumors, whether it's true or not. And usually we do that in order to break up friendships or defame the other person, to bring another person down, and usually to deflect attention away from yourself. We can see this in politicians very well, because they always mudsling, bring out all these things on others, so that people will look at the other person and not them. You know, they might be in hot water and then they start bringing out dirt on others, and you know, it's so common. But you know, usually talking about others involves our own ego. Either we want to be known as the person that has all the news, or basically, or for some other lot of subtle things work in the mind, or to just you know, ruin somebody's reputation or bring them down. Even if it's true, we shouldn't really indulge in that. Let somebody else tell it, but even if it's true. I mean, the bad things. Now, the good qualities, you know, there's no harm in telling the good qualities, but it's especially the telling the qualities that are going to make other people turn against them and then maybe favor you. So actually it's very interesting. The Pali word is called Pisunya Vacha, which means to break friendships, the breaking of friendships. Because the ulterior motive a lot is, you know, to tell something that people won't like that person, and maybe break up, and then you'll be able to then go and get that or something like that. So basically it's a, you know, that kind of thing. And then there's the harsh speech, which is downright swear words, you know, using the vulgar swear words, but especially with anger behind it, or hatred behind it. You know, sometimes in this day and age, some of the swear words are kind of almost common language, you know, like some simple four-letter words maybe, but and people might just say it in like a joking or something, maybe not with anger or hatred, but you know, when it's aimed at somebody with anger or hatred, then it's much stronger. But generally it's better to refrain from those, because people can always take it the wrong way. Because it just, especially when you use it, it will cause reactions in others, and will come back to us as karmic consequences. And then the last one is frivolous talk. This is probably the hardest one for people to practice, or useless talk. In the Pali Sutras it's called animal talk. But basically it means talking about things other than Dhamma. You know, talking about things that just excite the senses and just make a person kind of silly and frivolous kind of things. But you know, it's in this day and age, it's very difficult to totally refrain from those sort of things, because usually it happens when you get up in a conversation. It might start up as oh, how are you? You know, where do you live? But then, you know, our conversations easily get carried away in so many directions, and oftentimes it turns into malicious backbiting, telling tales about others, and just nonsense, talking about lust and delusions and crazy things. So control the speech, because a lot of karma is created through the speech. In fact, you know, especially like tale-bearing about others, and telling lies. These are wounds, you know, ill-timed speech to somebody at the wrong time can hurt them more than a stab wound, or can take longer to overcome than, you know, a stab wound or even a bullet in some cases. So that's why the right speech is very important, especially in terms of, again, the karmic consequences. and then having to deal with guilt, worry, remorse, and fear about getting caught or blamed for indulging in those things. And then usually the way you speak is also the way you're going to act. So right action is the fourth step of the Eightfold Path. And there's 3 types of right action. Mentioned in the sutta, which is the killing. It's how do you use the body. Actions done with this body. So killing or even physically, harming and abusing people with the body. Whether it's with your fists or taking weapons and so on. And then stealing, because normally we do that with our, hands or our legs, or walk to a house, whatever. So stealing. And sexual misconduct. And this is a very heavy one. Along with killing. And we can see, in the recent news is the sexual misconduct, even amongst people that, we shouldn't be doing that. I'm not going to mention specific names, but and it's just prevalent, especially in these modern permissive societies and so on, also repressive societies where physical contacts and others have been repressed in people, and these urges come out, and it causes so much suffering. And scars that last for a lifetime, becoming abused by this type of uncontrolled lust and greed for this. But especially it means by taking advantage of disadvantaged people, or taking advantage of weak people or young people, of course, child, but even other people too. But usually it's defined as committing adultery, to use that term. But, if you're married in a lawful relationship, then you should honor those vows if you took that commitment, because when you break that, it's going to cause suffering to a lot of different people, including somebody might come around and physically harm you as well. We all know the effects. So, all these are based on wanting to reduce suffering in the life. All these practices of the Eightfold Path, but especially of right speech and right action, they're about minimizing suffering. It's funny. People, if you ask anybody probably in the world, do you want to be happy and less suffering? Most people would probably say yes. Do you think? But then why are they doing things that actually bring them downright misery and pain? The consequences of their uncontrolled actions. So anyway, the right speech and the right action cover most of the precepts. Found within the 5 precepts. So when we practice right speech and right action, and there's another one that's not specifically mentioned as in those right speech or action, but it's about intoxicating the mind. So that's not directly mentioned in the Eightfold Path, but it's assumed. Because a sober person may not break many of the precepts when they're in a sober state. They may do some, but when a person's intoxicated, they can do anything and do all kind of foolish things, dangerous things, even killing others, like, driving in a car and killing others and so on. So that's all about learning how to live the life, because it's very important according to the meditation. So That's why I'm mentioning these things. Why the Eightfold Path, the path leading to the end of suffering, because so much of the suffering involves these kind of actions, uncontrolled thoughts and speech and actions. That's intimately connected with the law of karma. And then there's right livelihood. And this is especially important for like lay people. There's the fifth step of the Eightfold Path. That means having a job or a way of earning your living, because basically everyone has to earn a living of one kind or another to support themselves in this world. But it should be an occupation that doesn't cause you to directly, or ideally even indirectly, break any of those precepts. And there's specifically certain occupations that are mentioned in the text, like let's say a Buddhist probably shouldn't be a farmer that raises animals that are going to be butchered and slaughtered, for example, or dealing with poisons and weapons and vices that just also like dealing in alcohol or drugs and vices that corrupt other people's lives and also corrupt one's own life. And so many things that have their karmic interconnections that one way or another can come back to us. And even in many jobs these days, it's almost sometimes difficult to find a job that isn't connected in some way with subtle deceit. They're not telling the truth about one's products, for example, and we know what that is about. Deception, outright fraud, even banks, have committed so much fraud, and all these people wind up in prison, or at least a lot of them. But even coming down to like, a secretary doing the books for a big company, right? So you're doing your job and you're keeping the books of a big, multi-million-dollar company. The boss comes over, during tax time and looks over your shoulder and says, "Oh, why don't you change that 50 million to just 5 million? His income." What? Well, that wouldn't be right. Well, there's 10 people looking for your job. And so the person feels maybe pressured to do that, even though they know that that's probably not right. And we see that's happened so much. Even those people get eventually caught up and so on. So it's about having a livelihood where you can go home at night and say, today I didn't hurt a flea. I didn't do anything that anybody is going to suspect or blame or find out later that I had done something that I shouldn't have done. But this is what people lose their sleep over, and causes them ulcers and causes them other physical problems, is the worrying and all these stuff about things that you did that you shouldn't have done, or things you didn't do you should have done, or just the stress and the worry. It makes people physically sick also. So those are ways, especially for laymen, those first 5 steps of the Eightfold Path. Those are the guidelines for living the life, your daily life, your daily interactions. Because every single day it comes up where pressure or temptation to break one or other types of these precepts are going to perhaps come to you. And if you don't have know yourself, if you don't have some control over yourself, the temptations are very great, to make it easy, $10,000 by, doing this and doing that, especially in this tight economy day and age and so on. There's so many pressures and temptations. And people are looking for immediate gratification, of course, but then they wind up suffering down the line, sometimes big time. And so each person has to always be mindful when these things may creep up at any unexpected time. And you have to have your Dhamma there. Okay, this is right livelihood, wrong livelihood. This is wrong speech. This is wrong action. And so on. So that's what I mean is we need to have our understanding of the Dhamma on Google Alert, that we can immediately recall it and don't have to wait. I have to go to the library and get a Buddhist text first to find out. But now you can find anything you want on the internet. Just Google in what did the Buddha say about this, and you'll get a ton of stuff. Not only that, so. Okay, now, there's 5 steps of the Eightfold Path that we haven't covered, but we're already kind of getting near the end of our time, so I'll probably talk about those later, or if it comes up in questions. Of course, those last steps are right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So we've already been talking about, the right mindfulness and right concentration. But the right effort basically is the effort to do all of the above. The effort to overcome laziness and to practice those things. And tomorrow I'll finish up some other parts of that as well. Okay? So you can write any questions down, for this evening. So again, just as you're sitting there, take a deep, slow breath, just momentarily touch base. Come to ground zero, the present moment, the body grounded to the floor. Okay, now mindfully stand up to do a standing awareness. some three-part breathing. Just do that as long as you comfortably can. If you can tired, not in a straining way. Combine that with counting, you can also do that. Either that long, incoming breath that you're holding in, counting one. The breath going out, also one. Following the contracting movements, outgoing breath, all the way down to the in, that last bit of air going out. Here from the start, mixed in with following, ascending or expanding sensation of the incoming breath up to the top. Feel the pause. Leader from the start to out. movements. We're sitting again. Same deep, slow breathing. The in-breath, arms over the head, lock the fingers. Palms up, straighten the arms, stretch the head back. Out breath. Again, if you just on your own, if you want to make a adhitan or determination, not move. I'm going to ring the gong in about 50 minutes. It's for the interview period starting, so the others can continue sitting, but those who have the afternoon interviews can slowly get up for that. Just try to remember the basic steps for settling the mind into the body. And gradually opening into the flow of impermanence. Stay awake, alert, moment by moment, breath by breath. Gradually opening up to the flow of impermanence. Sensation, sound, thoughts, urges, perceptions, arising and vanishing. Being able to identify the aggregates as they affect the mind. That is feeling, that is perception, volition, ego consciousness. Those have the first interviews, slowly get ready. Others continue sitting, standing, walking.